my eye. Through the mist, my surprise shone light from distant northern skies. At that point, I realized I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. If this is all an illusion, then I'm willing to play.
Welcome to the Quantum Guide Show, interviews with awakened masters as they share their quantum work with you. The Quantum Guide Show is produced by Karen Holton, creator of the 9 Steps to Quantum Health Transformation, a free 9-step online course to give you the tips and resources you need to thrive. Karen lost and continues to keep off 178 pounds of surplus body weight as she made her dreams come true. Whether you are awakening to the ascension process or simply want a wiser, more efficient lifestyle, this program is for you. No strings attached. The Quantum Guide Show is brought to you in part by Zendome's Orgonite, Karen's unique brand of orgone generators, ethically sourced, handmade, and double charged for maximum effect. Find out how orgone generators work and what they can do for you. Don't be fooled by imitations. Check out Karen's current selection, only available from her website, KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Quantum Health Transformation. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Quantum Guide Show. Today in episode 47, I am very pleased to introduce you to one of my favorite returning guests, Preston Dennett. We have an exciting show for you today featuring some very real and well-documented experiences from Preston's book called Schoolyard UFO Encounters. As most of our viewers know, the extraterrestrials have arrived, and Preston's books contain original cases of people who have had extensive UFO encounters. These include schoolyard UFO contact with children all over the world. These UFO encounters might just change the way you view UFOs and these strange visitors to our planet. Before we continue with this fascinating subject, though, here's a little bit of background information about Preston Dennett. Preston began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and co-workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. Preston is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, also known as MUFON. He's a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 28 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. Several of his books have been Amazon UFO bestsellers. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlantis Rising, MUFON UFO Journal, Nexus, Paranormal Magazine, UFO Magazine, Phenomena Magazine, Mysteries Magazine, Ufologist, and others. His writing has been translated into several different languages, including German, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Icelandic. He has appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, Coast to Coast, and also the History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs and UFO Hunters. His research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. He has taught classes on various paranormal subjects, and he lectures across the United States. Preston currently resides in Southern California. Check out his website, www.prestondennettcom. prestondennett.weebly.com. Hi, Preston. How are you doing today?
Hi, Karen. I'm doing well. Hope you are too.
Oh, yes, I am. I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking. I'm really excited about the topic today because a lot of people kind of consider the UFO phenomenon as being either negative or scary. And here you've written a whole book on encounters that happened in and around schoolyards, which is really, really interesting. When you started to do your research on schoolyard UFOs, were you surprised by how many different cases there were and how many times it had been reported?
Oh, surprise would be an understatement. I was shocked. I mean, it really knocked my socks flat off because there were a few famous encounters. I think we all know about the Rua, Zimbabwe case, Ariel Elementary School, 1994. It's an amazing case where UFOs landed next to the school. I'm sure we'll get into that one a little bit, but that's a super famous case, which I knew about. And that was the one that started to get me thinking because I knew of another famous case at an elementary school here in the US, Opelika, Crestview Elementary School in Florida. UFOs landed next to the school. I'm like, I wonder if this is a thing. Because I remember there was another one in Australia at Westall High School. UFOs landed next to the school. I'm like, wow, are UFOs landing next to schools? Is this a thing? Are they doing it on purpose? I instantly thought of another famous case, Broadhaven Elementary School in Wales, 1974, I think it was. UFO landed next to the school, ETs came out. So I started digging deeper. And there were a few other famous cases. Hillsdale College was another famous case. That got international headlines. Those were the ones that sort of made me scratch my head and let's dig into this deeper. And I did. And I found, I mean, I had actually a few cases myself, but I started digging deeper, reading all the, I've got 300 books. Didn't find a whole lot in the books, but where I did find a lot is in newspaper articles. I subscribe to the UFO news clipping service. Bunch there. A bunch in the UFO archives of various organizations like MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, or NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, APRO, all these guys. And yeah, I found over 100 cases.
Over 100 cases.
Over 100, half at elementary schools.
Wow.
Which is a really interesting sort of statistic, I think, because it's mostly elementary schools. I don't think that's a coincidence. And when I say I found 100, I'm going to have to rewrite this book because I have got like 150 now. It's just, I'm going out of my mind with this, Darren. It's, some of these cases are just so touching. It brings tears to your eyes.
Well, my next question was the children who experienced contact or at least seeing the UFOs, were they traumatized? Were they upset? Did it have any kind of bad effect on the children? How was the phenomena perceived by the kids?
By and large, I'm going to say no, they weren't traumatized. That's not always the case because that does happen. What's really interesting about these cases is this is not your average sighting, right? Which is an anomalous light, pretty high up there at night, darting by and off it goes away. And maybe there's 3 or 4 people who see it. These are very low level sightings, very low level, 50 feet, 100 feet. They land in about 1/3 of the cases, and humanoids are seen, and/or. These are daylight sightings. These are long-lasting sightings. These are encounters where the school is specifically targeted. They come, down out of the horizon, from the horizon or out of the sky, and target the school, start hovering over it, stopping there, circling around it. So these are not your average sighting. And what's interesting, because these are widely viewed. We're talking, crowds of kids seeing these. And it's not just kids. Teachers see this in about half the cases. And kids are amazing UFO witnesses because they don't know what a UFO is, especially elementary age, which again is most of these cases. So they've never, in most of these cases, have not even heard of UFOs, don't know the term UFO, aren't familiar with the concept of people from other worlds. And they're very open to it. They're very accepting. You know, kids don't see skin color. They don't really care if you look that different. In most cases, they are absolutely just, you know, wow, look at this. This is amazing. This is cool. What's going on? And sort of just look at it in awe and wonder. But there are a few cases where it causes a panic, like the Rua, Zimbabwe case, November 1994, where a UFO landed next to the playground. There was 200 kids on the playground, and at least 60 of them saw that these UFOs coming and landing. Some did run in a panic back to the teachers, trying to get them to look, and the teachers didn't believe them and wouldn't come out. And some did have nightmares as a result. You know, there was one kid who started wetting his bed again. So sometimes there is trauma, but usually no. Kids are just like, wow, I saw this, and they draw little pictures. It's, in most cases, just sort of a unusual event that they remember for the rest of their lives. It does affect them profoundly. I mean, some become UFO researchers, not kidding. Some become teachers or astrophysicists, or it profoundly changes them, something they think about daily. That comes up quite a bit.
So we're mostly here talking about not just like some twinkly lights that are out of place in the sky. We're talking about real physical, three-dimensional flying objects that have come down, that have chosen to approach the schoolyard, have chosen to approach the children, and are they generally described as like saucer shape, or what is the most common shape of these objects?
Yeah, it's mostly saucer shaped, which sort of fits in with, you know, other encounters. The saucer shape is the most common, absolutely. But you have the entire gamut of shapes. Truly, there are many involving egg-shaped objects, cigar-shaped objects, you know, what do you call it? Boomerang-shaped, globes. And there are a few with sort of just glowing lights, but generally speaking, no. They come right down, and there's little portholes, and
so there's no doubt about what they're seeing.
No doubt.
No doubt.
This is close enough where they can see, you know, even the surface of the craft itself, the metallic surface of it. And they generally describe them as craft. And yeah, again, they're landing. They're landing in a good portion of these cases. 30% of the UFO landings compared to sightings certainly are really rare. So to have 30% of these cases involve landings is extraordinary. I think points towards the agenda that's going on here. These are very much what we would call displays. They're showing themselves on purpose. And yeah, all different shapes of craft. It's really interesting.
And they have let the children or the people at the playground or wherever the situation is, they actually let them see them so that they actually see the humanoids as well. And from what you've said so far, it sounds like they also are interacting. There's some interaction with ET. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really amazing when you think about it. There's no other encounter like this in the UFO literature. And by that, I mean, if, you know, a UFO showing itself at daytime to a large group of people. I looked for, you know, cases involving perhaps sporting events, and there are a few. I couldn't find anywhere near 100 So this is fairly unique. And UFOs do sometimes put on displays. The Phoenix Lights would be a perfect example. That was at night. The Hudson Valley UFO wave, most of those sightings were at night. This is different. And I think the UFOs know exactly what they're doing. It's really interesting. When the Hillsdale College incident happened, which is one of the few that was at night, Jim and Cora Lorenzen investigated it, as did a lot of UFO researchers. The Hillsdale College incident occurred in 1966, March, and involved this object that hovered outside of Hillsdale College in Michigan for about 2 hours and actually landed next to the college at one point. It was seen by over 80 students and school officials. The police saw it as well. Very well documented sighting. And Jim and Cora Lorenzen, some of my favorite pioneering UFO researchers, said that this is interesting. We have a bunch of cases in our files of schools hovering, of UFOs hovering over schools. It's very likely they are doing this on purpose and are trying to sort of get us used to their presence. And Raymond Fowler, who is probably most famous for the Andreasen affair and the Allagash abductions in Maine. He's a very famous pioneering UFO researcher. Again, one of my favorite. He said after this incident that 15 of the cases that he had investigated at that time period, I think it was 8 of them were UFOs hovering over schools.
Wow.
I know, it's incredible. And what none of them knew was that just 2 weeks later, the Westall High School incident would happen. And the Westall High School case is, again, 300 kids see two UFOs land next to the school. A bunch of kids ran up to it. They surrounded the UFO, watched it take off. It was a 20, 30-minute long incident. It is Australia's most widely viewed, most famous encounter. They're still talking about it today. It's so interesting to me because these objects, these ETs, are putting on a publicity campaign. It's like a book tour or a concert tour. They'll target one school, 2 weeks later, off to another, 1 year later, another, 2 weeks. It is boom, boom, boom. Really interesting timing aspect to it. And just bouncing around all over the world, showing themselves off. It's really cool.
It is, and it's cool that they're approaching children because children have that natural curiosity that rather than go directly to fear, they go to curiosity. What is it? Especially if they had not, haven't had familiarity with the subject before. So
Exactly,
that is
yeah.
really, really, really wonderful. I'm wondering, does ET ever give the children a message or a statement or tell them anything that the kids remember and can relate back?
Yeah, that does happen. It's not super common. And just going back a little bit to what you said, because children are good witnesses. Some people are like, well, they've got imaginary playmates. I'm like, yeah. And they are very imaginative and do kind of have a blurred sense of, what's real and what's not. But on this other hand, you got to remember, these are very widely viewed sightings. So a lot of people are seeing this at once. And there are teachers there as well who are by nature, by their job, well educated. So I'm not sure that, I think they're great witnesses because, like you said, they don't look through the lens of a very complicated belief system. They're not calling them angels or demons or anything. They're unencumbered by interpretations. And yes, they do get messages. And probably the ultimate case of that kind would be the Rua, Zimbabwe case at Ariel Elementary School, where about 10 kids did get messages. A good portion of them, 20, 30, saw the ETs come out, and they came right up to the fence line there. It wasn't a fence, it was just sort of a border made out of logs from eucalyptus trees. But some of these kids were like 10 feet away, less. And the ETs stared right at them and gave them messages. And it was really interesting. So this is 1994. And the messages were pretty much all along the same lines. Emily Trim, she's one of the students, she said that the ETs looked into her mind and gave her all these images and basically told her that humanity has become far too technological, that there's a good way to use technology and a bad way to use technology, and we could do much better.
Mm-hmm.
There was another, I think her name was, I forget her name, Liesel. At any rate, I think it was her who got this message, maybe not, because a number of them did get messages. One was told that we need to stop chopping down our forests.
Mm-hmm.
Another was told that we need to stop polluting our planet, and that there's dangers to, the way we're treating our planet. So it was all along environmental lines, which 2 points here. One is that in 1994, environmentalism was not a hot button topic like it is today, certainly. And these are little kids. It's not something they thought about. Their Ariel Elementary School is out there in a fairly rural area. I mean, it was a rural area. So it's a strange message for kids to get. And it matches precisely with the message adults get. It's the number one message. Yeah, don't be afraid. We won't hurt you. If someone has the capacity to actually listen to what the ETs are trying to say, that's what they will tell you. So that's a great case. There is another case. I talked to this lady firsthand. I met her at midnight in the desert, contact in the desert, a couple of years, 3-4 years ago. And she was sharing her encounter with me. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm working on this book. Because her case took place at an elementary school in Mentor, Ohio. And she was out there on the playground with all her friends. It's, of course, like around 11 a.m. or so. And her friends like, look. And a small group of them turn around and look and see this sort of classic gray saucer drop down out of the sky and land in this grove of trees. It's what they always do. They kind of go right into this little copse of trees there. And she got a message. And it was very clear in English and repeated. The ETs, I'm assuming that's what we're dealing with here, said very clearly in English, remember this day. Remember this day. And suddenly this object took off like a bullet, she said. You could just barely see it. If you weren't looking, you would never have noticed. And there was kids on the playground who apparently didn't see it because they were just playing along, la, la, la. But she sure remembered it. And they never talked about it. Sometimes it's the talk of the school for days, weeks, months, years even. But in many cases, no, it's not. And this one just sort of slipped by, and apparently it was more of a message just for her. Turned out she was a contactee and would have later encounters, and that does turn up in some of these cases. So yeah, there are messages. It's not super common, but I think really the message is just, hi, hello, we're real, we're here. It's a great way for ETs to sort of surreptitiously and cleverly announce their presence without causing, panic or headlines or, a big waves in society. And it's been very effective because now the younger generations especially are pretty much have a universal belief in UFOs.
I find it very interesting too that based on the so many different experiences that about, that you've researched, people you've talked to, it adds to the case that ET is not here to harm us, because it's all about improving the ecology of the planet. It's all about improving our health. It's all about getting along. Like evildoers don't do good work. It doesn't work that way. And so for me, it's very encouraging because It helps me to, well, I already believe that most ETs in their many different forms and ways of presenting do have our best interests at heart. But this is really lovely to see. And it's also interesting, you would think that it would be shouted from the rooftops. That many sightings, that many people finding out about it. You would think that we would all hear about it, but no, it seems to be fairly sanitized besides the initial, newspaper articles. It seems to be somewhat sanitized from our news service. But you see, ET's smart that way. Talk to children, communicate with children, do these displays, and that stays with these people for their whole lives and influences other people. So maybe you're right. Maybe that is the best way for them to advertise that they're here and that they care, rather than relying on a top down, where they're going to meet with the head of state who's then going to filter it down. It does seem to make sense that they would do direct contact, because nobody can take that away from you. You can read something, but if you've actually experienced it, even if the authorities say, oh no, that's not true, or it's your imagination, or they're just children, no, they can't undo that. So to me, that's really what you're telling us is cause to rejoice and to be happy and to be curious like the children and look more into it. I was going to ask you next, what is the weirdest case that that you feature in your book? The weirdest.
Oh, there are some weird ones.
Yeah, can you tell us about them?
Yeah, for sure. But just going back a little bit to what you said.
Sure.
Earlier. I think this is a publicity campaign, and some of these cases do make sort of local headlines. And it doesn't often go farther than that because we're dealing with an active cover-up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons. And I think this is a really good sign that this is a benevolent phenomena. I remember when I first got involved in this in the late 1980s, I was horrified. I'm like, oh my God, people are being abducted. It's against their will. They're being experimented on, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But the media looks through everything through a lens of fear, and that causes a lot of people to be just generally fear-based.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are, scared and you're having a traumatic encounter and you're looking at it through the lens of fear, it's very easy for you to say, "Oh, this is bad. This is evil. This is not good for us."
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at what is actually happening, people are taken on board or have face-to-face encounter, it's not bad. Yes, it can be scary. And there are some traumatic cases for sure. But by and large, the majority are not. And people are being given wonderful messages and freedom of movement on board the craft and shown the engine room. And they're becoming spiritually elevated by all of this. I just wanted to make that point.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. Thank you.
But yeah, there are weird cases for sure. And one that comes to mind occurred actually just a few days following the Lonnie Zamora landing in Socorro, New Mexico, and not far away from there. And this occurred at Stowell Elementary School on April 29th, 1964. And the main witness is Sharon Stull. Her little sister was also on the playground, and a bunch of other kids. Sun was shining, and this egg-shaped object comes down and starts hovering over the playground. And it's kind of bouncing up and down like a yo-yo a little bit and swinging back and forth and doing maneuvers, which they do, I think, to sort of show off a little bit. And Sharon's looking up at it going, wow, a lot of the other kids didn't seem all that interested. Her little sister got scared. But Sharon was fascinated, and she's staring at this thing for the entire duration of the recess. And finally, it's time to go back to her class, and she does. And her face starts feeling kind of hot and warm, and her eyes are kind of watering, and she's having a little bit of pain issues. And her teacher sees her and goes, "Oh my God, go to the nurse right away," because her face is like bright red. And the nurse, she goes to the nurse, and the nurse is like, "We need to take you to the doctor," because at this point her eyes were starting to swell up. She had like first and second degree burns, like a really bad sunburn. And the doctors freaked out and said, no, this could not possibly be a sunburn. Her arms weren't affected. And Sharon pointed out that she wasn't even looking at the sun. It was in the other direction. Her back was to the sun as she's watching this object. And so she had to be treated. She had to wear dark glasses. They put a salve, a lotion on her face. This caused quite a bit of an uproar. And what's really interesting is there was a newspaper article about this, so it was fairly well publicized. The police chiefs even warned people about getting too close to UFOs. So it's a well authenticated case. But in the weeks that followed, this is what's so weird about it. In about 3 weeks that followed, Sharon grew like a foot.
Interesting.
And not only that, became emotionally mature. Her growth, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually, was accelerated. She was just a little girl. And next thing, 3 weeks later, she's doing the dishes, cooking, talking more intelligently. Her mother freaked out. This case was investigated by Blue Book, by Jim and Cora Lorenzen. It's an interesting case.
Preston, that reminds me of some of the cases of UFO sightings when the UFOs land in an area on a field or something, and then they take off. There's kind of unprecedented growth in that area. You're probably more familiar with that than I am. And it seems to be another example of that, where she had the accelerated growth or maturing. What do you think that's caused by? Do you think there's a shift or differential in the timeline, or do you have any idea what that would be about?
Yeah, that might exactly be what's going on here. Because I've been thinking about this. I researched a bunch of cases where vegetation was struck by a beam of light and it accelerated the growth.
Mm-hmm.
A lady had a UFO hover over her garden and all the neighbors had gardens, and hers was suddenly twice everyone else's size. And they're like, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
They shouldn't say, oh, a UFO. She's like, oh, maybe it's my fertilizer. But yeah, case after case of this.
Mm-hmm.
And there are cases of people who've, grown a few inches in size, and cases of people who've been struck by a beam of light and it cures their cuts. And so what I think might be happening here is not so much the miraculous cure or miraculous growth, but accelerated growth. Rather, so perhaps they're aging her. Perhaps that's what's happening here, is they are making time flow super quick over. It's a time beam, because there are some cases of this. I have a case personally where ETs did this. So I think maybe they are able to, pull out a section of the universe and accelerate its timeline to a point where, they can heal a cut, and are just using the body's own natural processes to heal a cut. It's healing naturally. It's just accelerated. Or it's growing naturally, but it's just accelerated. So maybe that's what's happening here, or maybe it's something different. I hate to speculate, but you can't help it, because they're trying to figure these things out. And that's such a weird case, but not entirely unique. I found other cases. Like one guy was struck by a beam of light. He came home. He was 2 inches taller.
It doesn't surprise me, because these beings can travel unimaginable distances. And we know that they don't travel the way we travel, where we're going from point A to point B at this many miles per hour, because they'd never get anywhere if they did that. Because, the galaxy is so huge. I mean, oh my goodness, it's mind-boggling. So it does make sense that they would have the technology. And it's just very interesting. And it is weird. to have their growth, someone's age or growth, or, I've seen some live footage of some people that were out investigating a field where UFOs were, and even the side of the tree trunks, they've gone back years later, and the side of the tree trunks that faced where the UFO was seen have grown so much healthier and faster than the other half of the tree. So it's just amazing. It's mind-boggling, but
that apparently happened in the Travis Walton case.
Yes. Oh, I didn't realize that it actually aged him, or did he grow? Oh, you're talking about that's where they went, looked at the trees.
Yeah, with the trees.
Yeah, that must have been where I saw it. Yeah. So that is really, really cool. And besides that, are there any examples you can give us of children who've actually benefited? I know you've talked a little bit about some of them are more mature or they're more spiritually engaged afterwards, but are there any other ways that the children actually benefited from their close encounter?
Well, I think to some extent they all benefit just because they get that experience, which is something they all treasure by and large, and it changes your viewpoint and your worldview completely. There are things such as UFOs. So in that way, yes. I don't have any cases of like children being healed at schoolyards. I would say the biggest change is spiritually. As I mentioned earlier, some of them do become profoundly interested in quantum physics. That happened to Stanley McElhinney, and he would later go on the radio and talk about it. He became very interested in astronomy and quantum physics and UFOs. Another case where a person, it really affected them, was Malcolm Robinson of Scotland, who was out there on the schoolyard with his friends playing football. I believe, again, this is elementary school, and saw this sort of a globe-shaped UFO, white, and his friends are, maybe it's a balloon. He's like, I don't think so. It's still in the sky. It's just hovering there. Wouldn't it be moving? Because there was a little bit of a breeze, and it wasn't moving, and it stayed there. And he said there was just something really extraordinarily beautiful about it, which is something you often hear from UFO witnesses. They're struck by just the exquisite beauty of these objects. So they're all staring up at it and talking, and he looked down and looked up, and boom, it's gone. And it's looking everywhere for it, and it's completely gone. So clearly not a balloon, right? So years go by, and guess what? He becomes profoundly interested in UFOs, starts researching them, and eventually becomes one of Scotland's, perhaps the leading investigator in Scotland, and has written numerous books. UFOs over Scotland, UFOs over Scotland Part 2, and other books. So this is something we see. This is, I think, honestly, part of the ET plan. They're like, okay, let's see if we can find someone who's receptive. And you mentioned like, this is their way of going from the bottom up rather than the top down. Well, they did go to the top first. They did, meet with world leaders and ask them to disclose. And our world leaders said, no, we're not doing it. And the ET said, okay, fine. And they said, we're going to do it ourselves. I mean, they didn't say that, but they did. They're conducting what's obviously a grassroots campaign, going to the children themselves and showing them one by one. What's really interesting about these schoolyard encounters is they started pretty much precisely in 1950. I did find one early case in 1853 at Burritt College in Tennessee.
Wow.
Same thing, a big old display over the college. But really, it began in 1950 at Prestonburg, Kentucky, Prestonburg Elementary School. That's just a pure coincidence, which made me laugh.
I was going to say that after you.
Yeah, I got a good laugh out of that one. Because Prestonburg, Kentucky, and the UFOs came swooping down over this, schoolyard, And this is one where they scared the living daylights out of these poor kids because these were very loud UFOs. Usually UFOs are, virtually silent or totally silent. Sometimes they're loud, and I think it's on purpose. I don't think they need to be loud, but they want to, put on a show. And so they came roaring down over this school in Prestonburg, Kentucky, and the children just scattered and panicked. One fainted, another threw up. They thought it was the end of the world.
Yeah.
And the teacher rushed them all back into the school, calmed them down, tried to teach them. They were too restless to teach. And suddenly these UFOs come back. This time there's 4 of them. And does a repeat performance, even lower this time. And made it very clear these weren't planes or anything. And this did get local media coverage. And it's a good example of like ETs are like, all right, so governments decided to try to keep this secret. We're not going to let that happen. Because following that incident in 1950 in Prestonburg, Kentucky, there was high quality cases at least twice a year. I'm sure it's much more than that because most of these cases are not being publicized. And I think it's just the tip of the iceberg, the 100 cases that I found. Well, I know it is because I'm still getting cases. And it's just so interesting how they go from, they'll hit one school and 2 weeks later they'll hit another.
Yeah. It sounds like they got a plan. And do you see this happening more often as you get closer to present day? Or is this something that happened more often the farther you go back? Is there a time where this is increased or decreased at all in our recent history?
That's a very difficult question to answer because it does seem very active throughout the 1950s, which were very active. And I did actually a little statistical thing, and it's just fairly even. It kind of dips up and down a little bit, and it flared up in the 70s, and it went down in the 80s, and flared up again. And so it's fairly regular. And yes, I'm going to have to say it did kind of decrease a little bit in the 90s and the 2000s. And I think the reason for that is because the UFO reports have a tendency to take a while to trickle down to the record, into the UFO literature for a number of reasons. Witnesses often don't know who to go to talk about their encounter. They often are shy to talk about it. And the cover-up has become, very active. There still is a cover-up, even it's a disastrous failure. There is a clampdown on UFO reports in the media. So it takes a while for these reports to, it takes a year or 2 for a book to get published. So I am fairly certain there are just as many cases going on at the present day, but it's just going to take some years until we know, because people are, freaked out to report their sighting. They're afraid of being disbelieved, ridiculed.
Well, stigmatized for sure. I mean, the quickest way to become the laughing stock at a social gathering is to start talking about your UFO experiences or believing in ET. It seems to be not even today, not well tolerated, although it's getting better, and especially amongst younger people, and nobody wants that either. And it's certainly been discouraged by the mainstream media. But all in all, it does seem that there's been a lot of evidence, and also depending on what culture we live in, like for instance, some places in South America, it's so regular for them to have sightings, whereas some other parts of the world, maybe not so much. I don't know, would you agree with that, Preston?
Yeah, I think sightings that's what's so interesting about these schoolyard encounters. They are everywhere. I mean, most of the cases I, was able to document were in the U.S. I think because the U.S. is fairly large and does have a very active UFO community. But I found cases in Canada, Mexico, all across South America, all across the African continent, all across Europe. I mentioned Canada, didn't I? England, Australia, New Zealand, China. I found cases, which is amazing because it's hard to get UFO info out of China. Didn't find much out of Russia for this reasons that I think, information is hard to get out of there, particularly UFO information. This is absolutely a universal phenomena, and other countries are far more forthcoming for sure. Mexico is a good example. They've had, the Mexico City sighting in 1991 during a solar eclipse. Lunar eclipse today, by the way.
Yeah, looking forward to it if the sky's clear enough to see it.
But yeah, there was a case in 1991, I think it was, in Mexico City where 20, 30 people had their videotapes out and were videotaping this metallic object. Couldn't deny that. And the government, they couldn't suppress it. And I think that's what we see with certain cases. What's really interesting about the Schoolyard cases is some of the most famous cases in the world, the best documented cases in the world, are in fact Schoolyard encounters. The Hillsdale case, the Rua, Zimbabwe case, the Westall High School case. These are world famous incidents, and perhaps the most famous incidents in that area. Michigan's most famous sighting is probably the Hillsdale sighting. Certainly Australia's, Africa's, and Wales, the Broadhaven Elementary School. That's probably their most famous sighting as well. And they're all at schools. I'm like, wow, this is so interesting.
It is. It really is interesting. And in the description below this video is going to be some of a list of some of Preston's other books, and also where to contact him. But boy, we're running out of time fast, like we always do, and we're talking about this wonderful subject, Preston. But do you want to just tell people where they can find you and what you're up to, and of course, anything else you want to say about Schoolyard UFO Encounters would be great.
Yeah. Well, these encounters are still happening. I do have current cases, 2018, 2019. I know there's going to be more. So hope kids grab their cell phone. People have tried to take photos, and there are a few photographic cases. I do have a website, prestondennett.weebly.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. My books are available on Amazon, including this book, which is also on audiobooks too. More and more of my books are getting out on audio.
That's
I have
wonderful.
a YouTube channel. So I'm trying to put out my research there. Always keeping busy. I'm working on a brand new book right now. I'm so excited, Karen.
Yeah. Can you give us a little hint, a little teaser?
Yeah, I sure can. This is about a lady by the name of Dolly. She lives in Florida, and I've talked to a lot of people, hundreds who have had encounters, and many of them view their encounters through the lens of fear or have amnesia. Some have fully conscious encounters. Most of the people I've talked to, do have conscious encounters. I haven't dealt a lot with hypnotic regression, although I totally support it and believe it works. But Dolly is different. She, at age 14, had an encounter which was initially shrouded in missing time, but she said, no, I'm going to remember, and fought for her memories and remembered. They came flooding back in the few days following this case. And since then, she's had a lifetime of fully conscious encounters. And boy, I love Dolly. She's become a really great friend. And she doesn't view this phenomena through the lens of fear. She's gotten over that long ago, and has just the most amazing story to tell. And I've heard it all in bits and pieces from other people, but to have it in one complete continuous narrative, this book is going to knock people's socks off. It's so amazing.
Wonderful.
I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Preston, so much for coming back on the Quantum Guide show. I wasn't kidding, or when I said I wasn't trying to butter you up, but you are definitely one of my favorite guests because you're such a wealth of information. And it's not just what you know, it's how you present it, and your wonderful friendly manner really helps to take for those people that are still harboring a bit of fear, and I wouldn't blame them if they do. This is a pretty rich topic, but I really appreciate the way you that you share that information on the show. And I'd love to have you back again. I don't know, maybe in the new year we could talk about your experiences with out-of-body experiences, because that's another whole thing we haven't talked about. But thank you so much for being on the show. Everybody, please do check out in the description. There's a complete list, or not a complete list, but a hopefully near to complete list of all of Preston's books that are available, and where you can find them. And so I just hope everybody has a lovely week. And thank you again, Preston. Appreciate you so much.
Hey, my pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Quantum Guide Show. Become the change you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to Karen's YouTube channel, click the like button, and share this show with your friends. Check out Karen's website at KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com. All the links are available in the description box below. Until the next time, keep up the good work.
Splendor into endlessness puts all my inner strife to rest. For time gives birth to hurriedness. It all makes sense, well, more or less, and the sages put me to their test. With heart and soul to do my best to find the answers to my quest. I wonder and I must confess, I don't know